it does seem like there are going to be more U.S.-Russian bilateral meetings, perhaps a visit of President Putin to Washington or President Trump to Moscow. That's been discussed.
Well, President Trump has confirmed he'll be meeting President Zelensky at the White House on Friday to sign a deal on Ukraine's rare minerals. The US president said he believes President Putin will have to make concessions in peace negotiations with Ukraine. He warned that Ukraine should not seek membership of NATO and asked J.D. Vance to clarify the US position.
I can tell you that NATO you can forget about. I think that's probably the reason the whole thing started. And I think, JD, we can say that. Do you have a statement on that? You've been very much involved. I gave him the beauty.
Great. Maybe the hardest question, sir. I mean, look, as the president said, we're not going to do the negotiation in public with the American media. He's going to do it in private with the president of Russia, with the president of Ukraine, and with other leaders. And I think that's how this has to go.
Well, President Zelensky's made it clear any future peace deal will need to have security guarantees for his country. Sir Keir Starmer, who's meeting President Trump tomorrow, has arrived in Washington. The Times political editor Stephen Swinford, who was on the Prime Minister's plane, said he'll also be seeking security guarantees.
He has said that unless Donald Trump provides a security guarantee for British troops in Ukraine after a ceasefire, Vladimir Putin will come again, that he will invade Ukraine again further and he'll take more land. And his warning is that there basically needs to be a proper deterrent, and that deterrent can only happen with the support of the United States.
Well, Dr Michael Kimmage is a former advisor on Ukraine and Russia to the US State Department during the Obama administration. Good evening to you, Dr Kimmage.
Good evening.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight. So we know that our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who's meeting President Trump tomorrow, is going to be making it clear that if there is going to be a peace deal in Ukraine, then the US has got to provide some kind of security guarantees, security backup. Now, that's not something that Donald Trump has sounded very keen on in the past. How do you think that message is going to go down with the US president?
Well, it's negotiations from every direction at the moment. US-Russia, US-Ukraine, US with multiple countries from Central, Eastern, and Western Europe. And it's clear that from the Munich Security Conference speech of Vice President Vance and other messaging from the Trump administration, that the Trump White House very much wants Europe to be center stage and to do more. And what the U.S. is willing to provide by way of a commitment is really quite uncertain, I think, will be for the foreseeable future. So I doubt that there will be any direct deliverable from Prime Minister Starmer's visit to Washington. But one should add that relative to where the conversation was last week about a transatlantic rift, a complete break, everybody being not on the same page, things seem a little bit more conciliatory, a little bit more calm, and a little bit more cooperative this week.
So you think that perhaps President Trump is being a bit more receptive to the perspective of Ukraine and European leaders, including, of course, President Macron, who was there at the beginning of the week, and that perhaps he will be able to give a warm welcome to Keir Starmer when they get together tomorrow?
Yeah, I think a warm welcome wouldn't be a problem, shouldn't be a problem. And indeed, there does seem to be a willingness to listen. I think that the scenario some people had in mind after the Munich Security Conference was that there would be exclusive negotiations between the United States and Russia, and that Washington and Moscow would try to go over the heads of Ukraine and go over the heads of Europe to end the war. And that just doesn't seem to be the approach. But of course, it is the Trump White House. Things are often flexible and fluid. So they'll be back and forth on this point. But this seems to be a return to a somewhat more transatlantic purview of the conflict.
The Prime Minister made a big announcement on an increase in British spending on defence, going up from 2.3 to 2.5 within 2 years, an ambition to get to 3% in the next Parliament. So that's quite some years off. Do you think that that is going to land well with Donald Trump, who, of course, has been pressing other allies to step up their spending on defence, to take more control of their own security?
I think so. I mean, that's certainly part of the demand that, I mean, President Trump made it in the first term that he had, in a sense, much more politely. President Biden made the same request, and President Trump is really pressing the point at the moment. So yes, I mean, I think that is clearly what the White House is asking for, and we'll be happy to see any such evidence. But the core issue is really for ending the war is not the level of spending in one or another European country. The core issue is really this question of security guarantees to Ukraine. I don't think that President Zelensky is going to leave with something like that in his pocket, but that's really the fundamental question. And there, we're at the beginning of the process, to put it politely.
Yeah, and of course, the other big development today has been this confirmation that President Zelensky will be at the White House on Friday, and that he and Donald Trump appear to be ready to sign at least some kind of draft agreement on US rights to some of Ukraine's rare minerals. I wonder whether that will mean that the United States will have to provide some kind of security framework backup in some form or another, because clearly it's not going to be able to exploit those minerals if there's still conflict or the risk of fighting reoccurring.
Well, perhaps. I don't think that there's anything binding about this agreement. If you look at the language that has been made public, it's certainly there's no obligation that the United States is signing on to defend Ukraine or to sort of create a real security guarantee of some ironclad nature. So I don't think that we're much closer to that outcome than we were a week ago or a month ago, or frankly, than we were with Joe Biden in the White House. That's something that the U.S. has long been reluctant to do. On the other hand, it's very significant that President Zelensky is part of the process. He's part of the conversation. And in a sense, in a fundamental sense, he's a part of the negotiations. So I don't know if the details are that essential when it comes to the rare earths and critical minerals, but that Zelensky is going to be in Washington, that he's talking with President Trump, and that he's very much present in the negotiations, that's quite significant.
Where do you think this goes next? Because we had that initial meeting, didn't we, between senior figures from Donald Trump's administration, including Marco Rubio, meeting a Russian delegation led by Sergei Lavrov. Is that process going to continue with the US and Russia negotiating, or the fact that President Zelensky is going to be at the White House on Friday? Does that mean that Ukraine is going to have more of a say in where this goes when they're talking about the future of President Zelensky's own country?
You know, that's quite difficult to say. It does seem like there are going to be more US-Russian bilateral meetings, perhaps a visit of President Putin to Washington or President Trump to Moscow. That's been discussed. So nothing is clearly planned, and that's going to be one ongoing pillar. As we've already discussed, there's been a flurry of visits from European heads of state to Washington this week. That's another pillar. Then we have the Zelensky-Trump pillar as a kind of third pillar. It speaks to how complicated the geometry of these negotiations are, which is suitable to a war that has many different elements and many different moving pieces. So all I could say is, without much ability to predict where Act 2, Act 3, and Act 4 are going to go, that this is clearly Act 1. It's the beginning of the story.
And into all of this wades Sir Keir Starmer tomorrow with his meeting with President Trump, which has been much anticipated, much talked up here in the UK. There certainly appears to be a huge amount riding on it when it comes to our Prime Minister's reputation. I mean, the UK does have a significant role in chairing that Ukraine contact group of countries who are looking at future security for Ukraine. How important to Donald Trump do you think the relationship with the British Prime Minister, the US-UK relationship is?
Well, US-UK relationship is historically extremely important. I don't know if it was one of the key relationships of Trump's first term, but it was certainly a useful and productive one on both sides, if memory serves. Of course, it's a new personal relationship, and how that's going to work out is quite difficult to say. But I think that the UK has the virtue of its historic place as a key friend and partner of the United States, but it also has the virtue of not being in the European Union in this regard, that it probably makes it easier for the UK to deal with Trump's Washington, because one of the things that Trump's Washington is not so enthusiastic about is Brussels and the European Union. So the UK has the potential. I'm sure that this is a big topic of discussion in London and throughout the UK, but the UK has the potential to be a bridge, and to be a bridge between the United States on the one hand and Europe on the other. You know, how it pans out is hard to say, but that's the potential for that is clearly there.
And we're hearing, or there's a lot of speculation that Keir Starmer could raise the prospect of a state visit by the US president, hosted by King Charles. We know that President Trump does have a huge amount of time and respect for the British royal family. Do you think that that could help to ease relations?
I wouldn't put too much of a premium on that. It's, of course, the optics of that are nice, and it certainly wouldn't hurt. But the fundamental problem or fundamental issue is that there are these really hard questions involving Ukraine. How much military support is the United States going to give in the future? How much risk is Europe, UK included, willing to take in terms of protecting and defending Ukraine if the US is going to scale back, and how is the negotiation with Russia going to proceed? So all of those are just really hard questions. It would certainly be preferable to see those questions handled with a strong US-UK relationship, and you know, for that, personal relationships and optics are significant. But the scale of the problems is such that it's not to be solved by personal relations and sort of good vibes alone.
Yeah, and one of the other issues that Keir Starmer is trying to get an opt-out on is that question of tariffs. We've had President Trump once again making it clear that he intends to impose tariffs on a lot of goods from the EU, perhaps as much as 25%. Do you think that Keir Starmer does have at least a reasonable chance of saying to the US president, look, we are no longer EU members. We actually don't have in the UK a big surplus when it comes to goods between the UK and the US, and that perhaps the UK should be spared from some of these tariffs?
I'm sure that will be the pitch, and in that sense, it does seem to me that the UK is just better positioned at the moment than Germany. In terms of UK's very strong commitment to defense and high levels of spending, relatively speaking, for a European country, and at the same time not having that trade deficit. If you look at Germany, it's the exact opposite situation, that Germany is not a country that spends a great deal on defense, and there's a huge trade surplus between the US and Germany in Germany's favor. So in a sense, Friedrich Merz, when he becomes Chancellor of Germany, which I'm sure he will, is going to have his work cut out for him. And I would say that Prime Minister Starmer has a great deal to work with in Washington when he comes tomorrow.
Dr Michael Kimmage, former advisor on Ukraine and Russia to the US State Department. It's been great to speak to you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.